Hey y'all, welcome back to my kitchen. I'm Ashley and this week we're making a rustic apple cinnamon pie. We'll go ahead and get started with the pie crust. Just using an all-purpose flour. And then we'll put in some very cold cubed butter. And we'll give it enough pulses until it's like a coarse cornmeal. Now I like to use the food processor because it is a lot easier than cutting in the butter with forks or a pastry cutter, but if you have only those things, you can go ahead and use those. We'll go ahead and take the ice out of the ice water. You want to make sure that you're working with really cold butter and really cold water. And we'll pour this water in slowly, and just when the dough starts to come together in a ball is when we'll stop. All right. And we'll dump it out onto a counter. We're just going to form this into a mass, and then we'll divide it in half. And we'll use one half for our recipe today, and the other half can go in the freezer, wrapped in plastic wrap tightly, and used for another time. While the dough's chilling, we're going to make the topping for the pie. Now this is a rustic pie, which means it's not going to go in a pan. Instead, it's going to be more like a slab pie where the ends are folded over onto the filling. And something was missing when I was making this the last time, so I decided to add a crumble topping because I love a good crumble topping. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and start with 1/4 cup of brown sugar, 1/4 cup of flour, 2 tablespoons of butter, and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. And then we're going to mix it all together with our fingers until it's all combined and it has a nice sandy feel. All right, you can see that this is now sand-like, and this is going to be what we sprinkle on top of the pie. Now it's time to put together our apples for the filling. Now I'm starting with 3 Granny Smith apples, and you want to cut them 1/4 of an inch thick. Now this is a rustic tart, but you do want evenly cut apples so they cook evenly while they're in the oven. So 3 Granny Smith apples cut 1/4 of an inch thick. And then we're going to put in some sugar and cornstarch and some liquid to make a little bit of a slurry that coats to the apples and helps it cook, and then also creates a yummy syrupy glaze on the inside. So with the apples, we're going to add some sugar, cornstarch, salt, balances out the sweetness just a little bit, and then some lemon juice. That'll also keep the apples from browning, and some cinnamon. I always like to up the dose of cinnamon. And then I like to use fresh nutmeg. We're using just about 1/8 of a teaspoon, so I just like to do a little bit of fresh nutmeg, but you can also use ground. Smells like fall. And then we'll just give it a good stir to coat the apples. You could even have your kids do this part and just use their hands and mix it all in together. You just want to make sure that they're evenly coated. And the juices of the apple are also going to add some liquid to the pie. And our dough is going to kind of create an envelope around these apple slices. And then of course we'll have the goodness of the cinnamon streusel on top too. All right, so you can see all of the apples are coated with the mixture. And now let's roll out that pie dough. All right, our pie dough has been resting for about 30 minutes in the refrigerator. Now, really you can do 4 hours up to 24 hours in the refrigerator and it still works really well. If it's going to take longer than 24 hours to make your pie, or if you don't have plans to make it within 24 hours, then just put it in the freezer and then let it come to refrigerator temperature before you start with it. You do want it to be cold because that's where the butter and the flour will interact and create a nice flaky crust. But you also want to make sure that it's not too cold because then it's going to be hard to roll out. So let's go ahead and roll this out into a 12-inch circle. And you want to use good enough flour so it doesn't stick. Now in the beginning I kind of rock the dough back and forth a little bit, but eventually you want to get to a point to where you are rolling and then turning, rolling and turning very gently. You don't want to be too aggressive with it because then it'll start cracking. And if it starts to get a little rough on the sides, you can always piece it back together like this. And if it's cracking really bad, then it's just too cold and it needs to sit for just a few more minutes at room temperature. But the whole rolling and turning will give you a nice even circle. So if it starts getting funky, just push it together a little bit. You don't want to use too much of your hands because that warms the dough up because of your body temperature. And if it gets to a certain point where it's kind of hard to manage when you're turning, then you can just start going from the center outwards like this and shaping your dough that way. So from the center outward. So you can see we're probably at more of like a 14-inch circle. I like to use this because it's easy to roll out on. It's a nice surface to roll out on, but then it also gives you a little bit of a check of where you are. And I have this in my comments box if you're interested in finding one for yourself. So now that we have it rolled out until it's about 1/4 of an inch thick, we're going to do a dumping of the apples onto the tart. All right, don't do what I'm getting ready to do and leave the pie crust on the rolling out mat. Make sure to transfer it onto a parchment-lined sheet pan and then put the apples on top. It's incredibly difficult to move once the apples are in place. You'll see what I mean in a minute. We're going to take the apple filling and go ahead and put it on top of the tart. Uh-oh, I forgot to put it on the parchment. We're gonna lay it out so it has a good amount of space. And then we're gonna roll over the pie dough. So it's just kind of rustic looking. So it looks like that. Okay, so that's what I really meant to do. And then we'll take the strudel topping and just sprinkle it all over. And then just take a little bit of butter and break it apart and put it on top. And this will go in a 375-degree oven for about 30 minutes. When the crust is nice and golden brown and the insides are bubbling, remove the pie from the oven. Let it cool on a wire rack for about 15 minutes, and then take it off and cut it into wedges and serve warm. I love the crunch of the crumble on top, the warming apples, and cinnamon inside. Okay, the pastry is nice and crispy, but flaky. Thank you for joining me in my kitchen today as we made a rustic apple cinnamon pie. I hope it inspires you to make it with friends in your kitchen and share it around the table. If you liked today's episode, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. We post new content every week. Until next time, cook great food in your kitchen, share it with those you love, and we'll see you soon.